The alien colony existed in a quiet corner of the galaxy, far away from the bustling centers of power where empires and fleets clashed constantly. Their planet, though not very large, had a certain charm. Vast forests with glowing plants stretched across the continents. Rivers sparkled under the twin suns, and mountains rose like silent guardians over peaceful valleys. The air carried a sweet scent of alien flora, and the skies were painted with colors that shifted throughout the day, a natural spectacle that fascinated the few visitors who had ever arrived. To an outsider, this world seemed like a paradise, untouched by war or violence. The aliens themselves were a gentle species. They were smaller than humans in stature, with delicate limbs and large, expressive eyes that reflected both curiosity and caution. Their culture prized knowledge, art, and community over conquest or aggression. In their cities, the buildings were crafted with a mix of natural materials and light technology, designed to harmonize with the environment rather than dominate it. Streets flowed organically through the settlements, with gardens and water features creating a sense of peace. Schools were abundant, and almost every citizen had access to learning, which they valued deeply. Music and storytelling were central to their culture, and even children were taught the history of their people through songs and plays, despite their peaceful way of life. The aliens lived with a constant low-level anxiety. It was not fear that could be traced to immediate danger, but a quiet knowledge that their world was vulnerable. News of conflicts in neighboring star systems often reached them through long-range communications. Tales of planets destroyed by sudden attacks, of civilizations wiped out before they could even organize a defense, reminded them of how fragile their own existence was. They had no military, no fleet, and very little capacity to defend themselves if a powerful enemy chose to strike. These stories were discussed in schools, debated in public forums, and passed along in whispers in their homes. The adults tried to shield the children from the full weight of the fear, but everyone understood it deep down. Their safety was always uncertain. Daily life continued, yet it carried a subtle tension. Citizens went about their routines, trading goods, teaching classes, tending to gardens, but there was always a sense of being watched, not by any particular enemy, but by the universe itself. Even small decisions like where to build a new home or when to explore a distant region were influenced by the knowledge that they could not withstand a full-scale attack. The older generations often shared stories of bravery from ancient times, when their ancestors had fought small skirmishes and defended their cities with cleverness rather than strength. Those tales were meant to inspire hope, but they also reminded everyone of what was possible and what might happen if they failed to act wisely. Among the alien population, there was a particular family that represented both the beauty and the anxiety of their society. The parents were scholars who had dedicated their lives to studying the stars and the history of neighboring systems. Their children were intelligent and inquisitive, often spending hours observing the skies and wondering what lay beyond the familiar mountains and forests of their homeworld. The family lived in a modest but comfortable home near the edge of a glowing forest. Every evening, as the twin suns set and bathed the sky in brilliant hues of purple and gold, they would gather to share stories and reflect on the day. Despite the warmth of family life, there was a persistent question that hung over their heads. How long could this peace last? The community as a whole had similar routines. Markets opened at dawn, filled with produce, handcrafted items, and delicate artifacts that demonstrated both artistic skill and advanced understanding of science. Citizens moved with a rhythm that was both calm and purposeful, aware of the need to prepare for emergencies but unwilling to let fear dominate their lives. Children played in the open spaces, inventing games inspired by the movements of celestial bodies, while elders sat nearby, watching and occasionally offering advice or telling legends of times when their ancestors had faced danger. The colony thrived on cooperation and mutual respect, and while there was a sense of unease in the back of everyone's mind, life continued in a delicate balance. Even in these peaceful times, the aliens had begun to notice unusual signals from space. Sensors occasionally picked up anomalous, strange readings that could not be easily explained. While most of these signals were minor, a few were unsettling enough to warrant attention from the scholars and scientists. They speculated quietly among themselves, trying to determine whether these anomalies were natural phenomena or early signs of a threat. The average citizen rarely knew the full extent of these concerns, but it added another layer of anxiety to the daily lives of the more informed members of society. They began to discuss what preparations, if any, might be made for the worst-case scenarios, always returning to the same realization: they lacked the power to protect themselves if a true enemy arrived. Despite the anxiety, the aliens continued to cultivate beauty and harmony. They built intricate light sculptures that danced across the forests at night, created music that resonated with the natural rhythms of the planet, and wrote literature exploring philosophical questions about existence, morality, and the universe. These pursuits were not merely hobbies. They were essential to maintaining hope and morale in a society that understood its vulnerability. The arts provided an outlet for fear, transforming it into inspiration and fostering a sense of unity. Through creativity, they reminded themselves that life was still worth cherishing, even under the shadow of potential disaster. However, the shadow of danger was never far away. Elders frequently gathered to remind the younger generations of the lessons learned from history. They spoke of the importance of community, of vigilance, and of understanding the broader universe. Even as they celebrated daily joys, they reinforced the notion that survival required awareness. The contrast between the beauty of their world and the threats lurking beyond it created a tension that defined the colony's existence. Every bright sunrise and every gentle breeze was a reminder of what they stood to lose, and every act of kindness or creativity was a declaration that they would not surrender to fear as time passed. The colony remained in a fragile equilibrium. Life was peaceful, but the awareness of vulnerability remained. Children grew, learning the importance of both knowledge and caution. Adults worked tirelessly to maintain stability and harmony. Even in moments of celebration or laughter, there was a quiet understanding that the universe was vast and unpredictable, and that the colony's future depended on both luck and wisdom. The aliens' resilience lay in their ability to live fully despite uncertainty, to create beauty even when facing possible destruction, and to nurture hope even as shadows lingered on the horizon. It was in this delicate balance that the story truly began. The aliens' lives, though filled with routine and beauty, were poised on the edge of change. The calm they enjoyed was about to be shattered, and their understanding of courage, fear, and survival would soon be tested in ways they could not yet imagine. For now, however, the colony continued to live its quiet, vibrant life, unaware of the storm that was approaching but fully capable, as history had shown, of rising to meet it when the time came. The calm that had settled over the alien colony was suddenly broken one morning by a warning that no one could ignore. The planet's long-range sensors, which were usually quiet, suddenly blared with urgent signals. Strange blips appeared on the screens, moving faster than anything the aliens had ever encountered. At first, the scientists and scholars tried to rationalize what they were seeing. Perhaps it was a meteor shower or a natural cosmic phenomenon. But as the readings continued, it became painfully clear that this was not something natural. Something was approaching, and it was massive, powerful, and dangerous. Panic started to ripple through the colony. Messages were sent across the cities, alerting officials and citizens alike. People rushed out of their homes, looking up at the sky, their eyes widening in disbelief. From the horizon, the outlines of enormous ships could be seen, glinting in the light of the twin suns. These ships were unlike anything the aliens had ever seen. They were black and jagged, bristling with strange technology that hummed ominously. They moved with frightening precision, cutting through space as though nothing could stop them. The sheer scale of the fleet was overwhelming. Some of the larger ships were easily as long as several mountains, and smaller fighter vessels swarmed around them like deadly insects. The scholars tried to communicate with the approaching fleet, sending out signals of peace. They hoped, against hope, that perhaps this was a mistake, that the newcomers were explorers or traders who had misjudged their course. But no response came. The fleet continued to advance steadily, and the air filled with an electric tension, as if the planet itself could sense the danger. Citizens gathered in the streets, clutching each other, their fear mirrored in every face. The elders whispered stories of ancient threats that had been defeated long ago, but these tales now seemed distant and powerless against the reality. Unfolding above them within the command centers of the colony, the situation was even more alarming. Scientists and leaders scrambled to assess the fleet's capabilities. Based on what they could observe from sensors, the enemy ships carried weapons far beyond anything the colony could match. The energy signatures alone were terrifying, capable of leveling entire cities in minutes. Defense mechanisms were primitive, and the aliens had no real military force to speak of. They had always relied on diplomacy, knowledge, and ingenuity to survive, but now, it seemed that none of those advantages would matter. The alien leaders knew that without help, they were facing almost certain annihilation. Despite the fear, some attempts at preparation were made. Emergency shelters were opened, and people were urged to gather their families and valuables. Engineers tried desperately to activate protective barriers, though they were minimal at best. The colony had some defensive technology left over from older times, but it had never been tested against such a threat. Everyone worked together, moving quickly to safeguard what they could. But even as they hurried, it was clear that nothing they had would be enough to stop the incoming fleet. The sense of dread grew heavier with each passing moment as the first ships of the enemy fleet entered orbit. The sky darkened. The sun, once bright and comforting, was partially obscured by massive holes, casting long, jagged shadows across the cities. People could feel the ground vibrate slightly under the presence of these colossal vessels. Panic erupted in waves. Children clung to their parents, elders prayed silently, and adults tried to maintain some semblance of order. The once peaceful streets became chaotic, filled with the sounds of alarms, shouts, and the hurried footsteps of citizens trying to reach safety. Even the usually calm rivers seemed to ripple with tension, reflecting the looming threat in their mirrored surfaces. The aliens could only watch helplessly as the enemy ships positioned themselves strategically, blocking key areas of the colony and signaling the beginning of an assault. The first attacks were terrifying. Energy beams lanced down from the enemy ships, destroying structures and creating massive craters where beautiful gardens and homes had once stood. Panic turned into despair. The alien citizens, who had lived their lives in peace and harmony, had never faced such destruction. Their culture, so focused on creativity, learning, and community, was being torn apart before their eyes. Yet even in the chaos, some tried to help others. Citizens formed small groups, guiding the frightened to safety, sharing what food and water they could, and keeping each other calm as best they could. In the midst of the destruction, the alien scientists tried frantically to understand the enemy. They observed the ship's movements, the patterns of their attacks, and the technology powering their weapons. Notes were scribbled, data collected, and simulations run, all in the hope of finding a weakness. But the enemy fleet was highly organized, coordinated, and efficient. Each attack was precise, and every defensive effort of the colony seemed to be anticipated and countered. It became clear that brute force alone would not be enough to survive. The aliens realized they were facing opponents far more advanced and ruthless than anything they had ever imagined. The fear in the colony was not just about the physical destruction but also about the unknown. The aliens had no idea who their attackers were, why they had come, or what their ultimate goal might be. Was this a simple raid, a demonstration of power, or a prelude to complete conquest? The uncertainty made the terror even more unbearable. Some citizens attempted to flee to remote areas, hoping to escape detection, while others hid in the remains of underground structures, praying that the enemy would overlook them. But no place seemed truly safe. Even in hiding, the rumble of engines and the hum of energy weapons could be felt, a constant reminder that the invaders were everywhere. A small group of the colony's leaders gathered in the central command hub. They debated what actions could still be taken. Some urged surrender, hoping that pleading for mercy might spare lives. Others argued for evacuation, suggesting that even if the colony were lost, some of their people could survive elsewhere. Yet another faction insisted on resistance, trying to devise clever ways to slow down the enemy despite their obvious weakness. Every idea was met with doubt because they all knew the harsh reality. The enemy was overwhelmingly powerful, and the colony lacked the means to fight back effectively. The tension in the room was palpable, with fear and determination battling for dominance in every heart. As the day turned to night, the situation worsened. Explosions lit up the sky, and the once beautiful landscapes were scarred by craters and debris. Families huddled together in fear, trying to comfort one another as the sound of destruction echoed across the land. The aliens, who had known life as peaceful and predictable, were now forced to confront the chaos of war in its most raw and terrifying form. Their world was being transformed before their eyes into a place of fear and uncertainty, and they had no idea how much worse it could become. Yet, even in the darkest moments, a spark of hope remained. Deep within the colony, some continued to observe the enemy, studying their movements and looking for any pattern that might give them an edge. Though outmatched, they refused to give in completely to despair. They began to share whispered stories of past heroes, of ancestors who had faced impossible odds and found courage within themselves. These stories, though small in the grand scheme of the attack, reminded them that fear could be managed, and that sometimes survival depended not on strength alone but on intelligence, quick thinking, and the will to endure. By the end of the day, the alien colony had experienced what could only be described as a nightmare made real. Homes were destroyed, the sky was filled with foreign warships, and the people were terrified for their lives. Every moment was a struggle to survive, and every decision carried enormous consequences. Yet, even in the face of overwhelming odds, the aliens clung to hope, waiting and watching, their eyes turned to the stars, wondering if some hero from the galaxy might intervene before it was too late. They had no idea that help was coming, and that their lives were about to change in ways they could never have imagined. Just when the alien colony had begun to accept the terrifying reality of their situation, a strange and unexpected signal appeared on their long-range sensors. It was faint at first, almost lost among the chaos of the enemy fleet's presence, but it was different from anything they had ever seen. Unlike the attacks that were mechanical and destructive, this signal carried a strange rhythm, a sense of power and purpose. The scientists and scholars who monitored it froze in disbelief. The readings suggested the arrival of a force that was not only advanced but also capable of turning the tide of the battle. Whispers began circulating among the citizens. Could it be a mistake? Could it be another enemy? Moments later, the skies changed in a way that no one could have anticipated. From the depths of space, massive ships appeared, moving with astonishing speed and precision. Their design was unfamiliar yet strangely imposing. These were the Deathworlders' legendary warriors from distant systems, known for their fearlessness, strength, and tactical brilliance. Stories of their exploits had traveled across the galaxy, reaching even this remote alien colony, though most had believed them to be myths or yet now, they were real, and they were here. The citizens, who had been hiding in fear moments before, stared in awe at the ships that blotted out portions of the sky, shimmering with a metallic sheen that reflected the twin suns of their world. The Deathworlders did not arrive quietly. Their fleet moved like a perfectly coordinated organism, each ship adjusting its position with surgical precision. Smaller fighter vessels zipped around larger capital ships, scanning and analyzing the enemy's movements. The alien citizens could hardly believe their eyes. These were not the gentle travelers or merchants they had ever seen or imagined. These were warriors in every sense of the word. Their presence alone seemed to make the enemy hesitate, as if they sensed the immense danger these newcomers posed. For the first time since the attack began, the aliens felt something they had not experienced in days. Hope. The Deathworlders wasted no time assessing the situation. From their command ships, sensors analyzed every detail of the enemy fleet, the strength of their shields, the range of their weapons, the speed and trajectory of their smaller vessels. Orders were given in short, sharp bursts, and the response from the fleet was immediate. Wider ships darted forward to intercept incoming attackers, while larger ships positioned themselves strategically to protect the vulnerable cities below. The alien colony, watching from the ground, could only gape at the efficiency and coordination of these alien warriors. It was as though the Deathworlders had rehearsed this battle their entire lives, and yet every move was made in response to real-time threats. For the citizens, it was both terrifying and mesmerizing. The enemy fleet, which had seemed invincible just hours before, was suddenly on the defensive. Enemy ships were forced to adjust their formations, trying to anticipate the Deathworlders' tactics, but it quickly became clear that they were outmatched. The sheer speed and power of the Deathworlder ships disrupted every plan the attackers had carefully crafted. Energy beams that had previously devastated the colony's structures were now being intercepted or redirected. Explosions erupted among the enemy ranks as fighter squadrons launched precision strikes, crippling critical systems and sowing confusion. From the ground, the aliens could see their cities being protected in ways they had never imagined possible. Giant energy shields glimmered in the sky, absorbing attacks that would have flattened entire neighborhoods. Smaller vehicles whizzed past, intercepting incoming missiles and projectiles with breathtaking speed. The people, who had spent days in terror, began to gather courage, inspired by what they were witnessing. Some cautiously emerged from shelters, blinking at the sight of their homes being shielded from destruction. Others helped their neighbors, forming impromptu groups to assist the injured or guide those too afraid to move. The presence of the Deathworlders turned despair into determination, fear into cautious optimism. Inside the command centers of the alien colony, leaders and scientists were equally stunned. They watched as the Deathworlders executed maneuvers that were beyond anything they had ever theorized. Every attack seemed calculated not only to defend but also to neutralize the enemy with minimal risk to the planet below. The scholars recorded everything, knowing that witnessing this force in action was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Even those who had long been skeptical of myths and legends could not deny what they saw. The Deathworlders were real, and they were reshaping the battlefield before the eyes of everyone on the planet. Meanwhile, on the front lines of the battle, the enemy fleet struggled to regain control. Their attacks were no longer met with panic but with precise, deadly counterattacks. The Deathworlders moved with speed and confidence, taking out high-value targets, disabling weapons and cutting off reinforcements. Even the most experienced commanders among the aliens had never seen tactics so advanced and effective. It was clear that the Deathworlders were not only powerful but also highly intelligent, capable of making split-second decisions that altered the outcome of the fight. The enemy, for all its preparation and numerical advantage, was now reacting to the Deathworlders instead of leading the conflict. The alien citizens could not help but be amazed by the courage and skill displayed by these unexpected heroes. They watched as fighter ships dived into enemy lines, taking out ships many times their size. They saw the capital ships unleash devastating attacks, but with precision that avoided unnecessary destruction to the planet below. The Deathworlders' approach was not reckless. It was disciplined and strategic, demonstrating that true strength was not only in power but also in wisdom and control. The aliens began to whisper among themselves, amazed at the legends they had only heard in stories. This was not a dream, it was real, and it was unfolding before their eyes. As the battle continued, the aliens also noticed another remarkable aspect: the Deathworlders' respect for life. Unlike the enemy fleet, which had attacked indiscriminately, the Deathworlders seemed determined to protect the citizens at all costs. Their movements and strategies focused not only on defeating the enemy but also on safeguarding the planet and its people. This added another layer of awe and admiration. The aliens, who had lived their lives in fear of attack, we began to feel inspired, learning a powerful lesson in courage, strategy, and morality, all in the midst of chaos. Despite the overwhelming power of the battle was far from easy. Enemy ships still struck at vulnerable targets, and citizens still faced danger. Explosions rocked the ground, buildings shook, and panic still flared in pockets. Yet the difference was profound. What had once seemed hopeless was now manageable. The Deathworlders had arrived not just as warriors but as a symbol of hope, turning the tide of despair into a possibility for survival. The alien citizens, who had only known fear for so long, but began to understand what it meant to have allies, to see that strength, skill, and courage could arrive at the very moment they were needed most by the end of the day. The alien colony had witnessed something extraordinary. The Deathworlders had arrived at the darkest hour and had immediately shifted the balance of power. Their presence alone had changed the way the enemy fleet operated, and the aliens could now imagine a path to survival where before there had been none. Families who had spent hours in terror now dared to move outside, helping one another, assessing damage, and cautiously reclaiming a sense of normalcy. The scholars continued to observe, knowing that the lessons learned today could inform the survival of their species in the future. The citizens had seen heroism in action, a level of skill, courage, and compassion that they had only ever imagined in stories. Though the battle was far from over, the arrival of the Deathworlders had transformed the alien colony's understanding of what was possible. For the first time in days, fear was replaced with hope, panic with courage, and despair with determination. The aliens knew that the path ahead would be dangerous, that the enemy was still formidable, and that their lives remained at risk. Yet they also understood that with allies like the Deathworlders, survival was not only possible but probable. The memory of this arrival, the image of ships moving with unmatched skill and warriors acting with precision and bravery, would stay with them forever. It was a turning point, a moment when their world teetered on the edge of destruction and then, almost miraculously, found a lifeline in the form of these legendary beings. With the arrival of the Deathworlders, the alien colony had already begun to see a glimmer of hope, but the true turning point of the battle was still unfolding. The enemy fleet, which had initially moved with confidence and aggression, now found itself confused and disoriented. The Deathworlders, with their unmatched strategy and precision, were taking control of the battlefield. Every move was deliberate, every strike calculated. Their warriors, both on the ships and in smaller fighter units, coordinated flawlessly, leaving the enemy struggling to respond. For the first time, the aliens realized that they were witnessing not just an attack being repelled, but a masterclass in combat strategy. From the perspective of the citizens on the planet below, the scene was breathtaking. Massive ships darted through space with incredible speed, weaving between enemy fire and launching their own devastating attacks. The Deathworlders did not simply engage in reckless destruction. They struck at critical points, targeting weapons systems, command centers, and supply lines. Explosions erupted among the enemy ships, tearing holes in their ranks and creating confusion among their forces. Each successful strike was precise, demonstrating the experience and skill of these legendary warriors. The aliens could hardly believe their eyes. What had seemed impossible just hours ago was now happening in front of them. The enemy fleet, so terrifying and powerful, was being systematically dismantled amid the chaos. Small groups of aliens began to emerge from their shelters. Watching the Deathworlders, they started to understand that survival was possible. Fear was still present, but it was being replaced with determination. Families who had spent days hiding and praying now moved with purpose. Citizens formed groups to help the injured, clear debris, and assist the scholars and engineers who were still analyzing the battle. The Deathworlders' actions had inspired more than all, they had sparked courage. The aliens began to realize that even though they were not warriors, they could still contribute to their own survival in meaningful ways. On the battlefield, the Deathworlders' strategy became clear. They focused on neutralizing the enemy's ability to attack the colony rather than seeking unnecessary destruction. Their fighters struck with surgical precision, disabling weapons and engines, while larger capital ships provided cover for the vulnerable areas of the planet below. Each move seemed to anticipate the enemy's next action, as though the Deathworlders could read their minds. Even the most experienced commanders among the aliens could not fully comprehend the level of skill being displayed. Yet it was not only strength or technology that was impressive, it was intelligence, coordination, and foresight. The aliens watched as the enemy fleet began to break apart. Smaller ships fled in panic, larger vessels struggled to maintain formation, and command structures started to collapse. The Deathworlders, far from reckless, ensured that every attack minimized unnecessary damage to the planet. They created safe corridors for citizens to move, directed energy shields over vulnerable areas, and coordinated defensive fire to protect the colony from collateral damage. The aliens were astounded. These warriors not only fought with incredible skill but also with a sense of morality and purpose that made them truly heroic. The people began to cheer in small pockets, their fear giving way to hope, their despair transforming into a determination to survive. Amid this extraordinary battle, the aliens began to take small but significant actions. Scholars and engineers, who had spent hours in fear and uncertainty, now coordinated with the Deathworlders, sharing intelligence and identifying areas that required immediate protection. Civilians helped where they could, moving supplies, assisting the wounded, and guiding others to safety. Though inexperienced in warfare, their efforts were amplified by the guidance and protection of the Deathworlders. It became clear that the combination of the aliens' local knowledge and the Deathworlders' combat expertise created a synergy that the enemy could not anticipate. As the enemy fleet faltered, the Deathworlders escalated their offensive. Fighter units executed daring maneuvers, striking multiple targets in quick succession and retreating before the enemy could respond. Larger ships unleashed controlled bursts of energy, systematically disabling the remaining heavy units of the enemy. The aliens watched in awe as the fleet, which had once been a symbol of fear and hopelessness, now staggered under the relentless and precise assaults. What had started as a desperate fight for survival had shifted into a display of tactical mastery. The Deathworlders had not only turned the tide of battle, they had given the aliens a chance to fight back in their own ways, inspiring courage and unity. The turning point reached its peak when the enemy's command ship, the center of coordination for the fleet, was targeted. A group of elite Deathworlder fighters executed a flawless strike, disabling the ship's communication and control systems. The rest of the fleet, now leaderless and disoriented, began to retreat in confusion. Explosions rippled across their formations, and the alien citizens could see the balance of power shift dramatically. The sky, which had been filled with fear and chaos, now displayed moments of victory. For the first time, the aliens believed they could survive this attack and perhaps even rebuild stronger than before. In the midst of the chaos, families clung to one another, sharing tears of relief and gratitude. They had faced unimaginable terror, but the arrival and actions of the Deathworlders had shown them the meaning of courage, skill, and selflessness. Children who had been hiding in fear now peered out of shelters, watching the warriors in space and imagining what it might be like to face fear with such determination. The elders, who had prepared their communities for years for the possibility of attack, wept quietly, realizing that legends they had passed down for generations were real, and that heroes from distant worlds could appear when they were most needed. Even as the battle began to wind down, the aliens understood that the turning point was more than just the defeat of the enemy. It was a lesson in hope, courage, and action. The Deathworlders had shown that strategy, intelligence, and bravery could overcome overwhelming odds. They had also demonstrated that heroism was not reckless destruction but careful protection of life, a lesson that would resonate with the aliens for years to come. That citizens now recognized that fear, while natural, could be transformed into courage when paired with allies and a clear purpose. As the enemy retreated, the Deathworlders maintained vigilance, ensuring that no remaining threats could regroup. Their actions allowed the alien citizens to start assessing damage and beginning recovery efforts. The skies cleared gradually, revealing a planet scarred but not destroyed. Citizens emerged from shelters, helping one another, salvaging resources, and clearing debris from the streets. Even those who had been paralyzed by fear began to move with purpose, motivated by the example set by the alien colony. Once paralyzed by despair, now had a renewed sense of unity and resilience. The alien citizens had witnessed something extraordinary. The Deathworlders had not only repelled the enemy but had transformed hopelessness into hope, fear into courage, and chaos into coordinated action. Families, scholars, and ordinary citizens had learned the power of working together and following leaders who combined skill with morality. The aliens realized that their survival was not just due to luck, but because of the courage and expertise of these legendary warriors. They had seen heroism in action, a force that could protect, inspire, and change the course of events in the darkest hour. Even as the enemy fled, the alien citizens were left with a profound understanding. The turning point of a battle was not just about defeating the enemy, but about inspiring courage and hope in those who had been paralyzed by fear. The Deathworlders had done both. They had fought with precision, strength, and wisdom, saving the colony from certain destruction. At the same time, they had taught the aliens a lesson that would endure, that even in the most desperate situations, courage, intelligence, and cooperation could overcome seemingly impossible odds. And so, as the sky gradually cleared and the enemy disappeared beyond the horizon, the aliens stood together, exhausted but unbroken. The turning point had arrived, not just in the battle, but in the hearts and minds of every citizen. They had witnessed something they would never forget, something that would shape their culture, stories, and identity for generations. The Deathworlders, having changed the course of this battle, had also changed the future of the colony itself. They had arrived in the darkest hour and left an indelible mark of heroism, courage, and hope. After the enemy fleet had finally retreated beyond the horizon, the alien colony began to process the events that had just unfolded. The streets were quiet now, except for the hum of repair crews, the soft cries of the injured, and the whispered conversations of citizens still in shock. The scale of destruction was immense. Entire districts had been damaged, buildings reduced to rubble, and many familiar landmarks were gone forever. Yet, despite this devastation, the people felt something new stirring within them. It was a sense of relief, yes, but also awe, admiration, and gratitude. The presence of the Deathworlders had changed everything as the citizens cautiously emerged from shelters. They took in the sight of their city from a new perspective. The damage was clear, but so was the proof of survival. Energy shields, emergency defenses, and the precise actions of the Deathworlders had preserved critical parts of the colony. Gardens that had seemed doomed were still intact, schools had survived, and many families were safe. People helped one another move through the debris, sharing supplies, water, and food. Even those who had spent hours paralyzed by fear now found strength in action. Inspired by the example of the death, they began to understand that survival was not just about luck, it was about courage, cooperation, and resilience. In the central square of the main city, families gathered to check on friends and neighbors. Children, still wide-eyed from the chaos, clung to their parents, asking questions about the enormous ships and the warriors who had saved them. The elders explained as best they could, recounting what they had witnessed and adding the stories that had been passed down through generations. For the first time in many days, there were smiles among the citizens, tentative but genuine. The turning of fear into hope was palpable, and the air once thick with panic now carried a sense of cautious optimism. Scholars and scientists quickly got to work documenting everything that had happened. They examined data from sensors, mapped the movements of the Deathworlder fleet, and compared it with the enemy's behavior. For them, this was more than a battle. It was a lesson in strategy, courage, and technology. They understood that what had just occurred would influence the development of their civilization for decades, if not centuries. Knowledge gained from observing the Deathworlders' tactics, their precision, and their moral code would be invaluable. They began to draft plans, not just for rebuilding, but for preparing the colony for any future threats, armed now with inspiration and guidance from these legendary heroes. Meanwhile, the citizens also worked together to aid those who had been injured or trapped during the attacks. Small groups moved from street to street, carrying supplies and tending to wounds. Hospitals and emergency centers were overwhelmed, but the coordinated efforts of families, volunteers, and community leaders ensured that care was delivered efficiently. Even those who had been too young or inexperienced to contribute during the battle now found ways to help. It became clear that the battle's outcome had not only been determined by the Deathworlders' intervention but also by the willingness of the aliens to step up and act. Inspired by their rescuers' courage, the alien leaders gathered to address the citizens. They spoke of the bravery they had witnessed, not just from the Deathworlders but from the people themselves. Those who had organized shelters, delivered supplies, and guided others through danger were recognized as heroes in their own right. Leaders emphasized the importance of unity, vigilance, and resilience, explaining that the survival of the colony depended on these qualities. For many citizens, hearing these words reinforced the lessons learned firsthand. Courage, cooperation, and determination could turn even the darkest hour into a story of hope. Meanwhile, the Deathworlders remained in orbit for a short time after the battle, ensuring that no remnants of the enemy could regroup or cause further harm. Their movements were swift and precise, surveying the planet and neutralizing any lingering threats. The aliens watched with a mixture of awe and reverence, understanding that these warriors had not only defeated the enemy but had done so with discipline and a sense of moral responsibility. The Deathworlders' presence had been a lesson in heroism, demonstrating that true strength is measured not just by power, but by how it is used to protect the innocent. As the day progressed, the aliens began to rebuild. Communities that had been devastated by enemy attacks now worked together to restore homes, repair infrastructure, and bring life back to their cities. Every act of reconstruction was a small celebration of survival. Children helped plant gardens, artists worked to restore murals, and engineers assessed the structural damage to ensure safety. The aliens understood that while the battle had been won, the work of rebuilding and learning from the experience was just beginning. The Deathworlders' heroism had given them hope, but it was up to the colony itself to carry that hope forward into action. Stories of the Deathworlders' intervention quickly spread throughout the colony. Citizens shared accounts of incredible maneuvers, precise attacks in moments when lives were saved against impossible odds. These stories were told in homes, schools, and public squares, becoming part of the collective memory of the society. Even the youngest children absorbed these tales, learning about bravery, selflessness, and the power of decisive action. The Deathworlders' actions had not only saved the colony but had become a source of inspiration, shaping the values and aspirations of an entire generation. In the days that followed, the aliens reflected on the lessons learned from the battle. They realized that fear, while natural, could be overcome with courage and guidance. They understood the importance of preparation and unity, and they marveled at the discipline, intelligence, and morality of the Deathworld. These realizations sparked discussions about the future. Leaders and scholars debated ways to strengthen defenses, improve technology, and teach future generations about vigilance, courage, and the responsibilities that come with power. The battle had left scars, but it had also left wisdom, a roadmap for a stronger, more resilient society. The impact of the Deathworlders' heroism went beyond the immediate survival of the colony. Neighboring worlds, which had been watching the conflict through long-range communications, were inspired by what they had seen. News spread of a civilization saved by unlikely heroes, of courage and skill overcoming overwhelming odds. Other colonies, previously resigned to passivity in the face of threats, they began to organize their own defenses, motivated by the knowledge that assistance might arrive in times of need, and that courage could inspire action across the galaxy. The actions of the Deathworlders had created a ripple effect, influencing not just one colony but many. changing the way entire regions thought about survival and heroism. As weeks passed, life slowly returned to a new normal on the planet. Buildings were repaired, gardens were planted, and schools reopened. Families who had once hidden in fear now walked through the streets with renewed confidence. The sense of community, strengthened by the shared experience of fear, hope, and survival, became a foundation for the future. Every citizen carried within them the memory of that turning point, the moment when despair had been replaced with courage. Even the quietest individuals, who had been terrified during the attack, now understood the importance of action and resilience. Finally, when the Deathworlders prepared to depart, the citizens gathered to witness their leaving. There were no grand ceremonies, no parade, simply a profound sense of gratitude. Children waved, elders bowed, and families whispered thanks. Though the Deathworlders did not linger to receive praise, their presence had left a permanent mark on the colony. The aliens understood that true heroism often does not seek recognition, but that its effects can be felt for generations. The legacy of this intervention would be told in stories, songs, and lessons for many years to come. Even after the Deathworlders had disappeared into the depths of space, the aliens felt their influence. They had learned that courage, skill, and moral responsibility could change the course of history. They had seen firsthand that even the most overwhelming danger could be overcome with intelligence, cooperation, and determination. And most importantly, they had discovered the power of hope, how it could inspire action, transform fear into courage, and unify a community in the face of disaster. The alien colony, once trembling under the shadow of annihilation, now stood ready to rebuild, stronger and wiser than ever before. The victory was not just over the enemy fleet, but over fear itself. The aliens had faced the darkest hour of their lives, and through the intervention of the Deathworlders and their own courage, they had emerged victorious. The planet, scarred yet intact, was a testament to the resilience of its people. And as the suns set over the repaired cities and the forests slowly healed, the citizens knew that they had been changed forever. They had witnessed heroism, learned its lessons, and embraced its spirit. The memory of that day, the courage displayed, and the hope restored would endure, shaping the colony's identity, culture, and future for generations.